Within minutes, one of the most critical ports in Israel was burning. Massive explosions lit up the sky and containers were torn apart. Thick black smoke swallowed the coastline and spread across the horizon. This was not just an attack but a calculated message. According to emerging claims, it may have been triggered by a ceasefire that failed. The situation is still unfolding with information coming from early reports and regional media. Some of these details remain unverified and continue to evolve. However, if even part of this is confirmed, it could signal a major escalation. The region was already fragile before this development. At the center of it all is the port of Haifa. The port of Haifa is considered a vital economic artery. It also serves as a strategic lifeline for trade and logistics. Now it has become a reported target in a rapidly escalating situation. Iranian officials and affiliated media outlets have presented their version of events. According to them, everything began with a ceasefire announcement. The ceasefire was reportedly introduced by Donald Trump. It was widely perceived as aligned with Israeli interests. Iran, however, did not accept or recognize this ceasefire. Iranian statements emphasized that they were not bound by it. Despite this, claims began to circulate about a violation. Reports suggested that Israel may have violated the ceasefire. This contradiction became central to Iran's justification. A ceasefire proposed by an ally was allegedly broken by the same side. This created a narrative of escalation and response. If accurate, it formed the basis for retaliation. Soon after, reports described a sudden and coordinated strike. A missile barrage was directed toward the port of Haifa. This was not described as a symbolic or limited action. Instead, it appeared calculated and strategically planned. Multiple impact points were reportedly targeted at once. The strikes were said to be nearly simultaneous. This suggested an intent to maximize disruption. Early descriptions pointed to hits on container zones. Docking areas were also reportedly affected. Industrial sections within the port were targeted as well. Critical loading infrastructure was among the impacted areas. Within moments, the port descended into chaos. The initial impacts were only the beginning of the destruction. Secondary explosions were reportedly triggered soon after. These were likely fueled by flammable materials stored in the port. Fuel reserves and industrial cargo contributed to the fires. The fires spread rapidly and uncontrollably. Flames moved through container yards with intensity. Explosions echoed across the entire port area. Shockwaves were reportedly felt beyond the immediate location. Thick smoke rose high into the sky. The smoke was visible from long distances. Emergency response teams were deployed quickly. However, containment efforts proved extremely difficult. The intensity of the fires made early control nearly impossible. The damage extended far beyond visible destruction. Key infrastructure systems were reportedly affected. Cargo cranes were among the damaged components. Loading systems were also impacted. Storage facilities experienced significant damage. Transport networks within the port were disrupted. These systems are essential for smooth port operations. Even partial damage can halt functionality entirely. Ports rely heavily on coordination and precision. When these systems fail, operations collapse quickly. Reports suggest widespread disruption across the port. Activity was brought to a near-complete standstill. Ships halted their operations immediately. Cargo movement was stopped across multiple sections. Logistical networks were severely disrupted. The impact extended beyond the physical destruction. Haifa is a central hub in global supply chains. When such a hub shuts down, ripple effects follow. Shipping delays begin to increase rapidly. Cargo must be rerouted to alternative ports. This creates economic pressure across multiple sectors. The effects are not limited to one region alone. Analysts are closely monitoring the situation. Targeting infrastructure like this carries strategic implications. It signals a shift in the nature of conflict. The move suggests a transition toward high-impact disruption. Critical economic hubs may become primary targets. This raises concerns about further escalation. The situation remains fluid and unpredictable. At the same time, another battle is unfolding. This is the battle of narratives and information. Iranian media frames the strike as justified. It is described as a response to a violation. The narrative emphasizes retaliation and necessity. However, independent verification remains limited. Israeli confirmation has not fully aligned with these claims. This creates uncertainty around the full extent of events. The situation remains high impact but unclear. After the strike, instability continued across the port. Fires burned across multiple sections for extended periods. Smoke continued rising long after the initial impacts. Emergency teams worked continuously to control the situation. Damage assessments began shortly after the incident. Engineers and technical teams were deployed. Structural integrity became a primary concern. System failures were analyzed across multiple areas. Recovery timelines remain uncertain. Restoring a port of this scale is complex. Heavy damage increases the difficulty of recovery. Ports are uniquely vulnerable environments. They store fuel, chemicals, and heavy machinery. Cargo is often densely packed in confined areas. This increases the risk of chain reactions. One explosion can trigger multiple secondary blasts. This makes containment extremely challenging. Reports suggest such chain reactions may have occurred. The destruction may have been amplified as a result. Attention is now shifting toward long-term impact. Questions remain about operational capacity. It is unclear how much of the port remains usable. Repair timelines are still being evaluated. Partial operations may be possible in some areas. However, system damage can delay recovery significantly. Power distribution systems may have been affected. Communication networks could also be disrupted. Automated handling operations are critical to efficiency. Damage to these systems slows everything down. The biggest concern now is what comes next. Events like this rarely occur in isolation. They often trigger further responses. Strategic calculations may shift rapidly. Tensions in the region could increase further. The risk of escalation remains significant. The coming days will be critical. Observers around the world are watching closely. Much of the situation is still developing. Many details remain unclear or unconfirmed. However, the implications are already significant. If confirmed, this was more than an attack. It was a strategic signal. A signal about escalation and shifting tactics. A signal about vulnerability and response. A signal about how quickly situations can change. Global attention is now focused on what happens next. The outcome could shape future developments. Governments and analysts continue to monitor updates. The situation remains fluid and evolving. New information is expected in the coming days. Each update may change the understanding of events. For now, uncertainty remains a key factor. What is clear is the scale of reported disruption. The impact on infrastructure appears significant. The economic consequences may take time to unfold. Recovery efforts will likely be complex and prolonged. The broader implications are still emerging. This moment could mark a turning point. It highlights the risks of escalation. It underscores the fragility of ceasefire agreements. And it shows how quickly conflict dynamics can shift. The world is now watching what comes next.